The second family's inheritance. My father died and left half of everything to a family I never knew he had. My father found a way to ruin my life after he was already dead. It seems a man like him could never pass up one final power play. The real damage was done 2 days after his funeral in a lawyer's office. The room felt like a wood-paneled tomb designed to intimidate normal people. I am 48 years old, and I teach American history to teenagers. My life is quiet and has always been defined by a predictable routine. His world was full of expensive suits and secrets I never imagined. I always sensed the distance between his life and my own humble existence. He saw my career as a sign of my complete lack of ambition. Now I was sitting here waiting to hear how his ambition would echo. The attorney, a man named Gable, read the will with a practiced drone. His voice was devoid of any emotion or human warmth. I barely listened to the dense legal language he was reciting. The words were just a formal script to end my father's story. Then he said a name I had never heard spoken aloud before. The name was Leo, and his mother was a woman named Sarah. My father had left the secret family exactly one half of his estate. The air in the room became thick and impossibly difficult to breathe. My own mother just sat there, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. She must have already known what was coming, but gave nothing away. Gable paused for a moment, letting the silence confirm the words. He then pushed a cheap manila envelope across the polished desk toward me. He said their contact information was inside for the estate proceedings. My hand felt disconnected from my body as I reached out to take it. The envelope was thin and light, but felt heavier than anything I had ever held. I walked out of that office into a world that suddenly looked fake. The most unsettling part came when I finally looked at the document later that night. I was alone in my kitchen, the house completely silent around me. My father's signature was bold and firm at the bottom of the page. It was stronger than his signature had been in the last 10 years. It was the signature of a man who was not weak or dying at all. It was the signature of a man who had another life somewhere else. I tried to go back to my normal life for about a week. I stood in front of my history class talking about the Civil War. The students were taking notes, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept thinking about how my father had his own Civil War. He just managed to keep the two sides from ever meeting each other. My relationship with him was built on a foundation of cold duty. We had family dinners every Sunday that were exercises in quiet tension. He would ask about my job in a way that made it sound small. He always compared my life to the aggressive world of real estate. I never had the right kind of ambition he could understand or respect. My mother would sit between us trying to build flimsy bridges. She would talk about the weather or neighborhood gossip to fill the silence. He was so often away from home on long business trips. He said they were necessary for expanding his portfolio of properties. My mother would explain his absences with a cheerful, practiced patience. I see now that her cheerfulness was a kind of armor she wore. I accepted it all because it was the only reality I ever knew. I simply believed that this was what successful, important men did. They were distant figures who were too busy for simple family moments. I thought the emptiness in our house was the price of his success. I never questioned the separate hotel bills or the vague travel itineraries. It was easier to believe I was the disappointment in the family. It was easier than suspecting he had built a better life somewhere else. Now I remember all the times he seemed relieved to be leaving. He had a lightness in his step when he walked out the door. That detail used to confuse me, but now it makes perfect sense. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen table for days like a threat. I knew that looking would be a terrible and irreversible mistake, but the need to know became a physical ache deep in my gut. One afternoon after work, I finally gave in to the impulse. I typed the address into my phone and started driving without a clear plan. The house was in a suburb that looked almost exactly like my own. The streets were lined with the same kind of maple trees. The homes were modest, well-kept, and looked warm from the outside. I felt like a trespasser in a life that should have been a secret. I parked my car down the street where I had a clear view. For a long time, nothing happened, and I almost convinced myself to leave. Then the front door opened, and a woman who must be Sarah walked out. A man who looked my age followed her out onto the lawn. The resemblance to my father was immediate and sickening. He had the same jawline and the same way of standing, but his face was relaxed, and he smiled easily at the woman. He looked like a version of my father that was never angry. A young boy ran out of the house with a baseball glove. Leo picked up a ball, and they started playing catch in the yard. It was such a simple, perfectly normal American scene. It was also something my own father had never once done with me. He was always too busy or too tired for something so trivial. I watched them for 10 minutes as my world quietly fell apart. The legal problem in the lawyer's office was no longer an abstraction, it was real, and it was laughing in a suburban front yard. The illusion that I could just take the money and move on shattered. This was not about an inheritance. It was about a replacement. I started the car and drove away feeling a profound and bottomless grief. The image of them playing catch was burned into my memory. I drove to my mother's house the next day needing some kind of anchor. I found her in the formal living room that always felt like a museum. The furniture was perfect, and the silence was heavy and expensive. I told her that I went to the address from the lawyer's office. I described the house, the woman, and the son who looked like my father. I told her about watching them play catch in their sunlit yard. She listened patiently, without any visible sign of shock or surprise. When I finished, she just sighed as if I were a difficult child. She told me that she had suspected things for a very long time. She said she chose not to ask questions she did not want answers to. She explained it was a sacrifice she made to keep our family intact. She talked about financial security and the importance of maintaining appearances. Her logic was cold, practical, and it made me feel incredibly naive. She told me the best thing to do now was to simply accept it. She said I should take the money and allow the lawyers to handle everything quietly. She warned me that digging any deeper would only create a public mess. Her words were meant to calm me, but they made me feel worse. I felt a strange wave of guilt, as if I were the one betraying our family. She was telling me that my need for the truth was a selfish desire. It was my weakness that threatened to disrupt the peace she had carefully maintained. I left her house feeling more lost and confused than ever before. I had gone to her for an ally but found a gatekeeper instead. She was not protecting me from the truth, she was protecting a lie. My mother's denial left me feeling completely and utterly alone. If I wanted proof, I would have to find it for myself. The key to my father's home office had been on his keychain. That room was his private sanctuary, a place I was never allowed to enter. The air inside was stale and smelled faintly of his old cologne. Everything was perfectly organized, with files and ledgers arranged in neat rows. It was the command center for the man I thought I knew. I started opening drawers, not knowing what I was even looking for. I found tax documents, property deeds, and investment portfolios. It was a paper trail of a life dedicated only to making money. For a moment, I almost believed my mother's version of the story. Then I noticed one drawer in a large filing cabinet had a small lock. I found a key in his desk and opened it with a quiet click. Inside, there was not a single business document, but a single cardboard box. It was filled with photographs spanning at least 25 years. There were pictures of Leo as a baby, then as a young boy. There were photos of him at school graduations and birthday parties. There were dozens of pictures from family vacations I never knew about. My father was in almost every single one of them. He was smiling in a way I had never seen in my entire life. It was a genuine, unguarded smile full of pure happiness and affection. He had his arm around Leo, proudly showing off a fish they caught. He was helping a young Leo ride a bicycle without training wheels. He looked like a father from a television show, not the cold man I knew. This was the proof that could not be denied or explained away. My entire life had been the lie, the obligation, the second choice. I closed the box and put it back into the dark metal drawer. The photographs in the box gave me a terrible kind of certainty. I could no longer hide from the truth or pretend it was a misunderstanding. I had to look the other reality directly in the face. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Leo from the envelope. A man's voice answered, and I explained who I was in a few awkward words. He was quiet for a long moment before suggesting we should meet. We chose a small, impersonal diner halfway between our two houses. Sitting across from him in a vinyl booth felt completely surreal. He had my father's eyes, but they were kinder and less guarded. He explained that he was just as shocked as I was by the will. He said his father was a constant and loving presence in his life. He described a man who coached his little league team and helped with his homework. He was describing a stranger, a fictional character I had never met. I listened as the foundation of my own childhood turned to dust. I finally asked him about a specific fishing cabin up in the mountains. My father had always promised to take me there for a weekend. Every summer he would mention it, but a business trip always came up. Leo's face lit up with a warm, nostalgic expression. He said they went to that exact cabin every single year for his birthday. He shared a story about my father teaching him how to cast a line. The business trips were not just lies, they were my stolen memories. The promises my father made to me were kept for his other son. In that moment, the grief I felt was replaced by something cold and hard. The full scope of his deception was finally and brutally laid bare. I had been a placeholder in a life he did not want to live. I drove from the diner directly to my mother's pristine house. The cold anger in my chest had burned away all of my confusion. I was carrying the cardboard box of photographs with me this time. I walked into her living room and placed the box on her polished table. I did not say a word as I spread the pictures across the surface. I showed her the smiling man I had never met in my entire life. Then I told her about the fishing cabin that I was promised. I explained how Leo had received all of my father's stolen time. My mother looked at the evidence of that other life laid out before her. Her carefully constructed mask of composure finally began to crack and fall away. She started to cry, but they were not tears of sadness or grief. They were the dry, exhausted sobs of someone who was tired of lying. She finally admitted that she had known about them for many years. It was much more than a simple affair that she had ignored. She called it a silent arrangement they had made for their mutual benefit. She received the big house, the social status, and financial security. My father, in exchange, was given the freedom to be happy elsewhere. My parents' entire marriage was a long and complicated business transaction. My childhood had been just one of the clauses in their private contract. I looked at the weeping woman on the expensive sofa and felt nothing. The mother I thought I knew had just completely vanished from existence. In her place was a stranger who had sold her family for comfort. My world did not just shift, it was permanently and utterly shattered. I left the photographs on her table and walked out of the house. I knew that I would not be coming back to this place again. I was now completely and irrevocably alone with the wreckage of the truth. The feeling of isolation after leaving my mother's house was clarifying. The grief and confusion were finally gone, replaced by a cold purpose. I was done searching for answers or trying to understand their choices. The time for passive mourning was officially over. I was no longer interested in the emotional truth of the past. I was now focused on the cold, hard reality of the present. The inheritance was the only battlefield where I could actually fight back. I called Mr. Gable the next morning and fired him without an explanation. Then I found the most aggressive and ruthless family law attorney in the city. Her office was in a modern glass tower, not a stuffy wood-paneled room. I told her I did not want a quick or peaceful settlement. I wanted to make the entire process as difficult as legally possible. I instructed her to contest the validity of the will immediately. I demanded a full forensic audit of my father's entire financial history. I wanted to force them to spend their money to defend his money. This was never about getting a larger share of the inheritance for myself. It was about taking back some measure of control over the narrative. My father had used his money and power to build his secret world. I would now use that same money to dismantle his perfect legacy. It was a morally gray action, but I felt no hesitation at all. It was a war fought with legal motions instead of with weapons. I left the lawyer's office with a grim and joyless sense of satisfaction. The first official letters of legal dispute were sent out that afternoon. The battle for my father's memory had finally and officially begun. The legal battle consumed the next several months of my entire life. My world shrank to emails from my lawyer and stacks of financial documents. The process was slow, expensive, and exactly as ugly as I wanted it to be. My lawyer informed me that Leo and Sarah were struggling to keep up. They were selling assets to pay their own mounting legal fees. This news brought me a cold and distant sense of grim satisfaction. The comfortable life my father had built for them was finally cracking. Meanwhile, the audit of his finances began to unearth other secrets. There were questionable loans and business partners my mother never knew about. My father's perfect public image as a brilliant businessman started to tarnish. The conflict escalated when my mother called me for the first time in months. She was no longer calm or manipulative. Her voice was thin with panic. She told me the legal fight was becoming public knowledge in her social circles. She begged me to stop this destructive and embarrassing crusade against my father. She said I was dragging our family name through the mud for no reason. I listened to her desperate pleas without feeling any sympathy at all. I told her the name she was trying to protect was built on a lie. I explained that I was simply finishing the story he had started. I was fully committed to this path and would not turn back now. There was a long, defeated silence on the phone before she hung up. I knew in that moment that I had passed the point of no return. I was actively demolishing my father's legacy, and I did not care who got hurt. The tension was no longer just a feeling, it was a series of actions. The final blow came from the forensic audit my lawyer had ordered. She found a financial thread that unraveled my father's entire secret life. He had used a large inheritance from my mother's family decades ago. That money was the seed capital for the specific real estate venture. The profits from that venture directly paid for Sarah's house. It funded Leo's education and their entire comfortable middle-class existence. Their life was built on a foundation of my mother's family money. My lawyer told me we could use this to claim almost the entire estate, but I told her that I was no longer interested in the money. I wanted something much more significant and much more permanent. We drafted a final legal document that was an ultimatum, not an offer. I would drop all challenges and allow the 50-50 split to proceed. In exchange, they would have to sign away their claim to his name. The document stated their relationship was a private matter with no legal standing. It forced them to renounce any public association with my father's legacy. We met one last time in a sterile conference room with their exhausted lawyer. I explained the financial proof we had and the ruinous path ahead for them. Their choice was to sign the document and get their money quietly. The alternative was a public court battle they were now certain to lose. Leo looked at me with a profound and hollowed-out sense of defeat. He and his mother signed the paper without saying a single word. I had legally and officially erased them from my father's public story. I took the one thing they had that I never did, his name, and I made it exclusively mine. The lawyers sent their final statements and the money was transferred. The war was officially over, but the silence that followed was deafening. I now own my father's large cold house as part of the estate. I sit in his expensive leather chair in the study he never let me enter. The signed document that erases his other family is in the locked drawer. I have everything that I fought for over the last year. There is no feeling of victory, only a profound and hollow emptiness. The cold purpose that drove me for months has simply evaporated. It left nothing behind to fill the space it once occupied. I look around at the marble floors and the ridiculously high ceilings. This house is not a home. It is a monument to a lonely man. I spent so much energy and money to destroy a dead man's memory. I tore down the life he built to feel powerful for a brief moment. In my quest for a brutal kind of justice, I became like him. I made a cold, calculated transaction to secure my version of the truth. I am the sole heir to a kingdom of secrets and quiet desperation. The great irony is that I am now left with the exact thing he was running from. I am alone in this big, silent house with nothing but his money. He had to build a whole other life to escape this very emptiness. I have nowhere else to go. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.